Welcome to this session. It is session 3 of Unit 5. This session is about advantages, limitations, and effective use of chalkboard and whiteboard. Let's look at our objectives for this session. By the end of this session, you should be able to state the ways by which the chemistry teacher could effectively use the chalkboard or whiteboard, state the advantages of the chalkboard and whiteboard, and state the limitations of the chalkboard and whiteboard. Let's look at effective use of chalkboard or the whiteboard. One is that you should write in a clear and legible handwriting the important points on the board. Whether it is a whiteboard or chalkboard, your handwriting should be clear and legible. And so, with this, you are advised that at a point, go and stand at the back of, and then check if you yourself you can see what you have written on the board. If you go to the back and you are struggling to see, then your students, those at the back, are also struggling to see. Let your handwriting be clear and legible. At times you may have to make the letters that you write big enough so that they can all see, and then you may have to space your words in a way that it becomes clear to all of your students. The words written should be seen even by the back benches. You are teaching concept to the whole class, and so everything that goes on in the class should be to the advantage of all of the members of the class, so as writing on the board should be seen by all of your students. Those at the back are part of the class and you shouldn't ignore them. Unfortunately, sometimes if the backbenchers do not see, they wouldn't want to draw any attention to themselves, so they will still remain and will not let you know that they are not seeing clearly what you've written on the board. So at a point, if you can, try to let those at the back, some of them, let them read from the board for you to see, not to test their reading skills, but to check whether they are seeing what you have written on the board. If they are struggling to read, then it means there is something wrong. Either what you have written is not clear enough, or you would have to check your sitting arrangement for everybody to see what you've written on the board. The chalkboard should be glare-free. It shouldn't, whether whiteboard or okay, so the chalkboard shouldn't reflect so much light. In that case, when you write, they are not going to see well. So you see that at a point, all of your students will shift to one side so that they can see from the board very well. And so with this, you will have to check the board qualities. The board itself should be glare-free for students to see what you've written very well. Even sometimes whiteboards, they do reflect light, but you should check that it doesn't interfere with what you have written so that students will see very well. Because the funny thing is that if they are not able to see well, they will force to write something. And when they are learning, what they have forced to write is what they are going to learn and produce it when they are to, or apply what they have written when they are to apply. Use colored chalks or colored markers to emphasize some points. If what you have on the board, there are some points that you need students to draw attention to, then that point you should use a different color. Usually on the chalkboard, we use, in most cases, we use the background is black, and then the chalk we use white. If you are to emphasize a point, then consider using a different color for that very point. Draw difficult illustration beforehand to save the class time. Those illustrations that will demand a lot of input, a lot of time and energy, try to do that before it is time. There are certain diagrams that you intend drawing on the board, and it will take a lot of time. It can take like 20 or sometimes 25 minutes just to draw, especially if you want to show certain details. Please, in such cases, try to do them on the board before time so that it doesn't eat so much into your time to affect what you want to present to your students. Stand on one side of the chalkboard or whiteboard while explaining some points. Okay, so you should avoid standing at the middle when you are explaining certain points, especially if you have the point on the board that you would want students to look at. Then standing at the middle, you block their view. Then also make use of a pointer for drawing attention to the written material. If there is a point to emphasize, you want students to note a certain point, please don't just read that point, but try to get a pointer to show that very point. If you want to use cane as a pointer, you would need to wrap the cane with something that is very colorful so that students do not think of it as a cane. It is not ideal practice to be holding cane in class or to be taking cane in class. It puts so much fear in the students, and some of them would have to recoil into their shells. So if you want to use a cane as a pointer, please don't just take it as a cane to the classroom. Get something that is very nice to wrap it so that you use as a pointer. If you have other things that you can use as a pointer too, it is good, and you can use for drawing attention to the written material. Let's proceed to look at advantages of chalkboard or and whiteboard. They are very convenient teaching aids for group teaching. They are quite economical, especially when it comes to the chalkboard. Considering the price of chalk, it's very economical to use them. They can be used as a good visual aids for drill and revision. They are convenient aids for giving lesson notes to the students. Okay, so in as much as you don't have to dictate notes to students, the boards, the whiteboard and the chalkboards are very convenient for doing that. What about the limitations of the chalkboard? The use of chalkboard makes students very dependent on the teacher. In most cases, we don't use the chalkboard to only write important points. We tend to use to write notes, and giving notes to students is more of students being spoon-fed. So they become more dependent on you, waiting for you to present or to give everything to them. It makes the lesson teacher-centered. In most cases where teachers make good use of the chalkboard, it is from explanation to writing on the board. So teacher would Even in some cases, first of all, write everything on the board, and then we'll be holding a pointer. We'll read the point and then explain to students. We'll read the point, explain to students. It makes the lesson teacher-centered. The students' input becomes minimal, and everything would now be flowing from the teacher to the student, which does not help. It makes the lesson dull and of routine nature. What is the routine? Teacher writes on the board, explains to student, clean the board. Write again, explain to student, clean the board. It makes the lesson very dull. Some will come and sleep in your class. It's a limitation of the chalkboard. It gives no attention to the individual needs of the student. All we are doing is we are writing on the board, we are explaining to students. Whether the student is coping with what we are doing due to certain characteristics of his or hers, we are not interested in that, and it affects the student so much. What about limitations of the whiteboard? They become dirty after some time. When it is not cleaned with sometimes water and soap, then you write on. For some time, it becomes dirty. It's the surface wouldn't be white and it begins turning dark. You will have some dark spots on the board, which doesn't make it attractive. Whiteboards sometimes develop cracks, making it difficult to write on it. Due to the materials that they are made of, at a point you will have some cracking, and if not replaced, writing becomes difficult. Sometimes you are forced to use only one side of the board, and using only one side of the board sometimes only favors one side of the class, which is not good. Then also, considering whiteboard and the chalkboard, because we use markers on the whiteboard, it is relatively not very economical as compared to the chalkboard, because comparing the price of chalk to marker, chalk is less expensive the than the marker. So these are some of the limitations of the whiteboard. We are ending this session with these self-assessment questions. Try them, solve them, and let's meet in the next session.